Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Mendez. I'm a jazz and arts event presenter. I'm an arts and education specialist. I also do communications and I'm a media professional. Um, my website, Visual Concepts 123, features my media work and some of my arts and education work that I do pretty regularly. Um, so again, my name's Yvonne Mendez. I've been presenting and producing jazz events since the 1990s. My first pass at it was as the producer of the Bright Moments Festival. So that was an outdoor Pan-African music festival based at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which is where I live in Amherst, Massachusetts, in the beautiful Western Massachusetts area. And so for those of you who don't know the Amherst area, it is a cross between rural and suburbia. I live in what they call the Five College area. So there's five colleges around. It's UMass, of course, UMass Amherst, Amherst College, Smith College, Hampshire College, and Mount Holyoke College are all in this area. So this is a very culturally rich area. I've been blessed to actually be here to help produce theater and music events. The Bright Moments Festival in particular, we featured artists like Hugh Masekela, Fela, B.B. King, Poncho Sanchez, Tito Puente, the Uptown String Quartet. Those were all events and more that we presented. And it was connected to Jazz in July, which is a jazz improvisation training program that was started by Billy Taylor, Max Roach, and Dr. Fred Tillis. Some of you might recognize Jazz in July. It's still happening now. We just had a great event on the Common, the Amherst Common, just a few weeks ago. And I always look back on that like, man, I was in my mid-20s and I was working there and interfacing in the summer, every summer, with these jazz greats like Billy Taylor. I'm like, Billy, you're supposed to be on stage, or, Max Roach, everyone in the green room. And at the time, I just didn't know that much about who they were. And now I look back on it thinking, wow, I had such an opportunity rubbing elbows with these really great, giants. And at the time, I didn't even know it, But it kept me, really aware and in the business. I really enjoy the impact that music has on audiences. And so the work I've been doing at UMass and doing in Western Massachusetts quickly moved from theater producing to jazz producing. And so I really enjoy the impact on audiences, the community building aspects of presenting music. Each time that I've been able to produce, it's been, something that grew the community, that became a mainstay for folks to reach out to each other and to learn more about the music, to learn more about jazz, to learn more about jazz artists, keeping folks in tune with themselves and with the music per se. Really building that community. And so for me, the excitement, even despite living through COVID, was trying to keep the music alive and trying to keep folks engaged with the music and with the musicians. This is a very, a rich idea and goal of mine, is that musicians learn as much as the audience learns when there's really beautiful interaction and community brought together. So I know I kind of launched into that very quickly. I want to remind people that there is the opportunity to put comments and questions in the chat. And I'm sort of going back and forth, looking at the chat and hoping to answer any of your comments or questions. So feel free to do that as we, move along. I want to talk about the best performance that I ever attended live, because I feel like it propelled me to another level with presenting jazz. And so this performance, I was actually helped produce it, the Jazz in July faculty concert. And when Art Harper and Avery Sharp were in the midst of this back and forth solo exchange that just took my breath away. And what I realized was that it wasn't just me, everyone in the room, it was like you could hear a pin drop. When the song was done, the whole auditorium of 200 people, they were just completely silent. And then suddenly, all together, everyone was on their feet clapping and cheering. And I just never forgot how those two musicians and that band just had affected us that night. And I feel like, sometimes something happens to you, you're trying to recreate it. I'm not necessarily trying to recreate that because it was their wonderful artistry. But that feeling of connection to the musicians, to the music itself, I mean, that's really worthwhile. It's strong. And those are the kinds of presentations I'm trying to achieve. So since 2012, I've been presenting jazz music in a non-traditional way, utilizing community spaces in order to reach different audiences with jazz. I worked with a committee to build a program called Valley Jazz Network here in Western Massachusetts, based at the UMass Fine Arts Center. And the goal was to present events that offered a more intimate experience with jazz and with jazz artists. So to that end, our audiences actually started at 25 people and blossomed into more than 250 people. It was clear that people were looking for this more intimate interaction with jazz and with jazz topics. And so the format that we created, we coined a phrase called informants. To represent that arts and education aspect of our presentations. So sometimes we'd pick a topic, like for instance, we presented an event called Latin Music and Jazz, featured Felipe Salas as a scholar who talked a lot about the clave beat and how that was brought into jazz music. And then we had a band, the Gonzalez brothers, perform after the talk. So you could hear the rhythms in the music. So we've done a few events like that. That format really works. We did it in a community space in Holyoke, Massachusetts, who has a very large population of very large Latino population. So wanting to bring it, present in the community for the community, which is one of the reasons why I present in different spaces and different places throughout Western Massachusetts. Other ones that I presented, Caribbean rhythms and jazz, steel drum, pan jazz. Actually, Ron Reed from Berkeley came over and did a talk on steel drums, and then his band performed, which was really fascinating to hear the Caribbean rhythms in jazz music. And then, a few others. One of note was Jazz Music and Social Change, where I invited artists to come and talk about how they feel their music moves social change forward. That one featured Christian Scott, Atunde Ajuwa, Helen Sung, the pianist, and Toshi Reagan. And so most recently, I presented Riffin' the Reality, Women, Gender, and Jazz. And that event featured scholars and musicians talking about gender issues with jazz, a big topic, close to my heart, really. Terry Lynn Carrington and students from the Jazz and Gender Justice Institute were joined by scholars, Tammy Cornoto and Sarah Elizabeth Charles. And we had such a great, lively conversation about women and gender. And, these folks shared personal experiences and their hopes for how to forge a new pathway and a new face for jazz, keeping in mind those historical achievements of women in jazz, as well as, current efforts to expand gender issues in jazz music and in the field of music and jazz. So, it was really fascinating. The conversation was followed by a pre-recorded concert with the Berkeley students. And they were playing with Terry Lynn, and then a special guest, Tia Fuller, came in and played. So it was really exciting. It was an opportunity for me as well. I started to facilitate the conversation. So that was one of the first ones conversations I facilitated. But it goes back to this whole idea about, sort of alternative ways of presenting jazz and presenting jazz topics specifically. And like I said before, I'm really trying to present a more intimate experience with jazz and with jazz artists. So I'm calling my customized jazz work Valley Jazz Informances. The program that I helped build at UMass that was focused on this intimate experience with jazz is called Valley Jazz Network. And so I've expanded it to include informances, which is the phrase that we coined as a committee to talk about education and performance together. So information and performance, we get informants. So I'm calling that Valley Jazz Informances. And like I said, I purposely look for community venues and partners to collaborate with to present artists and conversations. I like this, presenting in different communities, because like I said before, you reach people where they are. And I also see how it affects the breadth and the spread of jazz and the success of my outreach into specific communities. Engagement is really important. Collaboration is also very important, like true collaboration where everyone is involved, everyone's voice is equal at the table, decisions are made together, and people are invested in having a good event happen, So as many venues and partners that I can reach to help promote the work, the better. So currently I'm working with 2 venues in the local area, more than 2, but I want to talk about these 2 because we're just getting started with this. And I will have to say that some of this is very new to me. I'm very excited because, since COVID, everything has been up in the air. Things are changing all the time. And I feel like this idea of curating smaller events, reaching a smaller audience, but making a big impact is the way to go. So I'm working with a performance space in Greenfield called Hawks and Reed. And Hawks and Reed is a multi-use performance space. It's in a semi-rural area of Massachusetts. It's based in Greenfield. It's further north than Amherst. And although this venue is for profit, it serves the whole community. It's like one of the only spaces for rent in that area. And they have town officials are having meetings in their space. People are doing weddings in their space. They are doing community meetings in that space as well. But on top of that, they present a pretty vibrant performance series that includes like hip hop, rock, reggae, pop, and jazz. And so we're trying to have a more regular jazz presence in the area and working with them to fit that into their regular series. Their spaces are fit between 75 people in a cafe configuration with a raised stage to they have a small wheelhouse that's a smaller space that's more like spoken word or smaller events. And then they have a large sort of multi-use space on the 4th floor that they do for weddings, and they do theater events and can do larger jazz and music events up there. So I'm excited to get started working with them. They've already programmed 1 jazz series in October. The other venue, just to flip it a little bit, their situation is a little different, is Gateway City Arts. And they are based in Holyoke, Massachusetts. It was shuttered during the pandemic, and they really weren't sure they were going to reopen. But they're friends of mine, and I was really happy that they decided to open up. They have a very large space that's being programmed by another third-party agent. But They have a smaller space they want to do jazz in. And this space is a small space. It seats 75 people, also in a cafe kind of setup with a bar. And having a jazz series there would be a mix of local jazz artists and maybe some national names. And trying both of these spaces, Gateway City Arts and Hawks and Reader, trying to make a bigger jazz presence in the area. And I'm glad to be a part of it because that's what I want too. So I'm working with those two groups. It's really important, the mix of local and national. It's really great to expose audiences to those broader artists that are touring, let's say nationally or internationally. But also it gives local musicians an opportunity to be seen, to be a part of the scene and, to get gigs. So we've been, trying to make it be a mix of those two, because I think that is more beneficial for each venue, but as well for jazz in general. I want to do a couple of personal comments about that. Years ago, I was a part of New World Theater, who presented the Black Musicians Conference. And one of the things I liked about the Black Musicians Conference is the camaraderie that came from bringing the artists together. So there's a really wonderful exchange between artists who had probably never met each other before coming together. And I felt that a little bit with one of my presentations, Jazz Music and Social Change, where I talked about before with Christian Scott and with Helen Sung and Toshi Reagan. And they were taking selfies together. They were sharing ideas and thoughts about different kinds of projects that they were working on. And that in itself, I was just fascinated by these artists who were interacting, and audience members were seeing that interaction and also interacting on that. So there were multiple levels of engagement happening in the room. And I think that's really wonderful. And I see it happen a lot with festivals. So I love music festivals because, like I said before, I enjoy the environment, the atmosphere that is created, the building of community. I mean, often at a festival, people come to the festival and they don't even know who's playing, but they're there to share community, to share music, to share culture. And so I am actually the festival coordinator for the Springfield Jazz and Roots Festival. And that festival attracts between 5,000 and 8,000 people each year. And a big part of it is creating that environment of community building. And also, like I mentioned before, bringing in those artists who are innovative and willing to share their artistry, and often in an educational way, do workshops, work with youth in the community, work with community members as well. So we're creating a very rich interaction and engagement that actually keeps the festival going. I'm checking the comments to see if there are any things that I need to cover as well. And at the end, I'll tell folks how to reach me and give you my information. So I also wanted to talk while we're waning down into the last few minutes about how people for a while were debating that jazz was dying. And what I've seen is there has been a resurgence where young people have embraced jazz in a really unique way, added their own twist, and, really making the music swing the way they want to. And I've heard people say, well, that's not really jazz. And I have to say that I feel like that is what keeps jazz alive, is that jazz has always been a genre of music that changes and embraces change and embraces different aspects of culture and of music. Jazz is rooted in the New Orleans tradition, rooted in blues and gospel traditions. There are hints of voodoo just in the formatting of jazz music, call and response, the underpinnings of improvisation. And so I've always been fascinated by that. I think that there's room for more. And I actually, for one, enjoy the music of these new artists that are coming up, like Micaiah McCraven, or, Zakai Curtis, or the Curtis brothers. Chris Davis is doing some work at Berkeley in using DJs with jazz. And so some artists are using spoken word artists with jazz, which is also very fascinating. So I'm the one who is kind of like, bring it on, like bring these things in and engage as many people as you can with these different genres that intersect with jazz. And it's not new for jazz. That's what I'm saying. And people want to act like it's new for jazz, and it isn't really new for jazz. But I do pay homage to the giants and to the masters, and I think young people should do that. And I hear, the inflection and the influence of the masters, Thelonious Monk and others in the music. So I wanted to say that because I'm also someone who loves all different kinds of music. My parents passed away and I inherited a very big record collection, and I started to remember all the music that my parents and my uncle in particular would play around the house. And one of them I'm going to share is this, Ahmad Jamal. Well, my mom was always playing Ahmad Jamal in the house. I found this in their collection as well, Money Jungle, which is interesting. There are two of these recordings, and my parents have them both in their collection, which is kind of crazy. But this is the one that I thought was a surprise to me, and I hope you can get it. It's Mahalia Jackson, which I didn't know was in my parents' collection. And so there are some of these artists that, there's Billie Holiday, Miriam Makeba. There's all kinds of stuff in their collection. And this is, kind of what I grew up with, listening to different kinds of music. I would have to add my own music is Funkadelic, Earth, Wind and Fire. I was listening to South Soul Orchestra, Mos Def, but I was also listening to Elton John, the Doobie Brothers. So all of these things, what we're made of, our appreciation for music, this is where, for me in particular, I'm looking for all different kinds of artists to present in different venues in different ways. And I think that's the way to go right now with jazz music, or that's the way that I would like to move through it. I also want to add, Angelique Kidjo is one of my favorite artists, not just her artistry, but her social justice work. But I have a love for Latin music as well. Eddie Palmieri, I love Olga Tanan, Gilberto Santa Rosa, Hector Lavoe, Mark Anthony. I listen to those, and I also listen to Black violin, which I love. I love Black violin and what they stand for, and the music, the artistry is just really wonderful. So I'm sort of patterning that with my presenting by offering a variety of jazz music that offers, innovation. I'm interested in innovation because I really feel that is what's keeping jazz music alive right now. So, jazz that encompasses different genres, the blendings, it's still jazz. And so paying homage to the giants as well as doing new things, I think is what I'm interested in. And I see it happening, and I see it being really exciting and vibrant. The last thing I wanted to really cover was this presentation we put together called Jazz Music and Social Change. Because, music and art reflect the times that we live in. And, as Billy Taylor said, jazz is America's classical music. And so the beginnings of jazz, like I said before, in the New Orleans tradition, in the blues and the gospel tradition, rooted at times, certain format of jazz can be attributed to voodoo traditions, voodoo rituals. I mean, there's a very rich history. Christian Scott goes into it a lot with his music. It's incorporated into his music, which I love. The importance of the drum and rhythms and tempos of music, call and response, all of that stuff, are musicians speaking to each other, but also speaking to us. And those roots are of jazz are within the Black community. There's been racism and there's been sexism in jazz music, and we recognize that. It was clear with Riff and the Reality. We talked through how often female musicians are, discriminated against in jazz music, and the same with Black musicians and musicians of color. Often you would see that Black musicians are overlooked for gigs, and notoriety and gigs went to white musicians. And so this is a history we can't ignore, but it can be changed. I see some of the work that Terry Lynn Carrington is doing with the Jazz and Gender Justice Institute is changing and expanding the idea of gender in jazz music, changing the face of jazz music with their own real book that focuses on female composers of color, which is great. Loving that, because I see that as a big change for the face of jazz. And I just wanted, this is, my pitch to jazz presenters is that we can undo some of these wrongs, things that have been overlooked, that, remember that when you're programming a season or planning a jazz event, that, consider increasing the percentage of your Black and brown performers in your season and in your roster. That in and of itself at times could be a political thing, but it shouldn't be, because the music is couched in that tradition, and being able to offer opportunities is where I am, which is what I focus on, trying to offer as many opportunities as I can that gets to the root of the music. And so in conclusion, I love crafting and presenting jazz in alternate spaces and in alternative ways, because I think it's going to really create a beautiful new foundation for jazz, combined with some of the efforts of some of the folks I mentioned from Berkeley and some of the artists that I mentioned. I feel like this is a really wonderful and exciting time for jazz, that we can push this beyond COVID into the next level. Musicians can connect with me. My website is visualconcepts123.com. And you can send me an email to my Valley Jazz Informances email. It's vjinformances@gmail.com. I'll say that again. I'll say it's vjinformances, typing it in, @gmail.com. I thank you all for coming and listening to me. And I hope that you are just as excited about this as I am. I look forward to seeing some other alternative venues for jazz presentations in the near future. And I love this idea of sharing ideas and moving this genre forward in a really difficult time now with COVID, but also an exciting time to do something new and exciting. Thank you so much.